Hello and welcome to our new series. We're once again going to be learning to program, this time using Python. Now, we are specifically going to be using Python 3. If you are on Linux, then hopefully that's enough. Please use whatever package repository or package management system you're using. And if you search for Python 3, that should be enough to get you where you need to go. For macOS, I would suggest using either MacPorts or Homebrew. You can do a search through there for Python 3 and install it. For Windows, you can go to python.org and click on Downloads. That'll bring you to this page, and then you just click Download, and it'll download an installer. You can use that to get a Python 3 development environment going on your system. Now, I said we're going to be using Python 3. In the links, I will have links in the description to both the download page as well as this page explaining the difference between Python 2 and 3. Since if you are watching these videos, I assume that you're learning Python, and it's best to go ahead and start learning with 3. But if you're coming from the 2 world or are just curious, then these 2 pages will help educate you on the differences. Or should you run into having a library on Python 2 that's not on Python 3, this will help introduce you to ways to fix that problem. The other thing that I'm going to be starting with this series is, again, link in the description, I'm starting a Github repository with all of the code that I'll be using as an example in this tutorial series. Now, if you've watched my C++ tutorials, I will eventually add that code into this repository as well. But for right now, I'm focusing on this tutorial series, and then I'll swing back around and finish up re-recording those. As an example, today we're doing 101, and this will be the code that we'll be starting with. So let's go on in there. Now, Python is an interpreted language. It is convention to use the .py file extension for your files, and to start them, if you intend to use that file as an executable, so to speak, you start that file conventionally with the # and the exclamation mark, and you can, if you know the path that Python will always be at, which you probably don't, then you could put it here. But instead, we can put /user/bin/env or environment, and then space, and then Python 3. Now, we put Python 3 here specifically because we want to make sure that we're using Python 3. If you put just Python, on some systems it would use Python 2, but we want to make sure that we're using Python 3. And on all systems that Python 3 is on, it will at the very least have Python 3. It may also have Python, and that Python may be pointed at Python 3, but you can be certain that it will have Python 3. So, what this will do is when a shell on Linux and Mac and maybe PowerShell, I'll be honest, guys, I'm not going to be talking too much about Windows just because I never use it, and so I'm not positive, but there's plenty of information out there about it. So if something isn't working the way you would expect it or the way you hoped it would, please Google it, or leave a comment below, and I will be happy to help you search for the answer that you need. But as it is, the ! Tells a shell or a term. So, for instance, bash shell, or the shell that comes up when you open the terminal in macOS. That what follows this will be the interpreter for the rest of the file. So we tell it that we want to send it into environment. An environment, what it actually does is it takes what's after this and finds its path and then executes that instead. So what happens is it looks for Python3 on this system and then interprets the rest of this file using that. So the reason why it's pound ! In part is because pound is a comment. The pound ! At the first line of a file is a special case. But in the rest of the file, anytime you use a pound sign that's not inside of a quotation mark, it starts a comment. So in this case, it's a single line comment. Now right below here, comments are pieces of information that don't actually get executed. So anytime you want to, for instance, if we didn't want this piece of code to run, we could comment it out. Or if you just want to add more information to the file as a way of documenting or explaining what you're doing or your thought process in this particular code, then you would use comments. So you'll notice these triple quotation marks. What that's actually, and then it followed by triple quotation marks down here at the bottom. What that's doing is it's creating a multi-line string where inside of which you can use quotation marks, you can use new lines, you can use just about anything you want, and it keeps all of that in the string format for you. So anytime you have a block of information that you want to store and call up, you'll want to use this. This is a multi-line string, so this could be a whole block of code that would be completely ignored if we wanted. Since we don't set this to a variable, it's basically ignored. There's no such thing as a multi-line comment. Just put the pound signs in front of any lines you don't want interpreted. Or you can create this multi-line string, and I'm almost positive that since we're not setting a variable equal to this, that the interpreter is smart enough to just ignore it. So this is a Python script, and when it comes to Python scripts, the way that we tell it where the start of our code for the executable, if it's being run as an executable, is with this line of code right here. Right here. So basically what this is telling the interpreter is that if this variable underscore underscore name underscore underscore contains main, then execute the following block of code. And in this case, it just contains a call to our main function that we actually created up here. We define this function up here. We'll get more into functions and their definitions later, but for now, just know that this is telling the interpreter to execute the code inside of that's defined up here. So the interpreter would read through all of this, mostly just storing this information up here, and then once it got down here, it would say, oh, okay, so we're about to actually need to do something, to actually execute something instead of just define it. Okay, we're going to execute this. We're going to execute the main function. So then it would look back through its the data that it had collected for main, and it would find it where it had been defined up here, and then it would start this colon starts a new block of code, and this particular block of code is what gets executed when you call main. So the block of code lasts as long as the indentation lasts. Python is a white space delimited language. So you have to be very careful about about your spacing. If your spacing is off, it will misinterpret what you mean. So for instance, if I took one space out of there like that, it would freak out. So just be very careful that when you start a code block like this, that the entire code block lines up like that. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. Also, make sure that whatever you use to denote this space, you stay consistent. So if you use a tab for this, then always use a tab for it. If you use spaces to determine this, then always use spaces. It's very important, because if you put a tab here and spaces here, then it's very possible that it will interpret it as a different amount of space between there and not interpret it properly. So, the stereotypical first program you write is hello world, and to do that in Python, you do this bit that we talked about before, and then in your main, we could also put the print down here, but just to show the normal way that you would do it, I created the main function, I defined it up here, and have it print hello world. Now I got a little bit more fancy with this, and I imported the system module, or sys, and I'm also going to print the platform, sys.platform. So we're calling into this module the platform inside of it. And then I'm also printing the version from that. Then just to show you a little bit of fanciness that you could get into later if you'd like, I'm also showing you how, using system, you can tap into the standard out and write to it a string. Now basically what this is doing basically the same thing as print is, but print is a nicer, it has some extra stuff in there, it's handling some things for you, and it also automatically puts this new line character, that's what this is, at the end of the string for you. So you'll notice that when we print it, when we actually execute this, this will be on its own line, this will be on its own line, and this will be on its own line, and then finally this will be on its own line. So let's get out here. Now if you're on Linux or Mac, you'll need to change the mode of your script file to make sure that it's executable. I'm doing this via command line. You can also do it via the GUI. You'll want to go into where the permissions are. On Mac, there's a get information, and then down at the bottom there's permissions, and then there's a check box for make executable, or this is executable, or something like that. That's the word you're looking for, is executable. Both on Mac and Linux, you want to make sure that this is marked, this file is marked as executable. If you're using command line, then that's the command you would use. And once you do that, it will run just like any other executable. Now you'll want to make sure that you're running it from inside of a terminal, or else it's going to blink up a terminal and go away instantly because there's no user interface, or it's not going to behave the way you want it to, basically. So you'll want to run it from inside of a terminal. And so we see our hello world. We're running on Linux. This is our version information, both for Python, and I'm pretty sure that's the build system that this particular Python was built on. And then finally, we get a little fancy with the cheese whiz, sending straight to standard out the by with a new line. That's why there's this blank space right here. So I'm going to get straight into recording 102, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.